Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. One of the big issues this election campaign for the provincial Ontario legislature is going to be transit and transportation. And I wanted to talk specifically about that if I could. I have been chairman of a civic advocacy organization over the course of the last 6 years or so called Transit Alliance. And before that, I was on the board of directors of Transit Alliance, and I've been very involved in transit issues through the Western GTA Summit, which I was a co-founder of and co-chair of, and the Western GTA Summit. And transit, I think, is a defining issue for the Greater Toronto Area for a couple of reasons. Number one, the description of Houston is that there are something like 40 lanes of freeway traffic that go into downtown Houston. Houston's about the same size as Toronto, and there's 12 lanes of freeway traffic that go into downtown Toronto. So order of magnitude difference. And at one point in time, back in the 1950s, there was a plan to have a Scarborough Expressway, a Spadina Expressway, the Highway 400 Black Creek Expressway was supposed to continue down. So there would have been 5 and potentially 6 different freeways accessing downtown Toronto. And so Toronto would have felt like and looked like Houston. And we decided to not do that. Bill Davis, in his wisdom, stopped the Spadina Expressway. As you know, Highway 400 ends at the 401 Black Creek Drive, continues, but it ends just a little bit farther south of that. And the Scarborough Expressway that was going to go right through the beaches, thankfully, was never built. So three freeways that were supposed to be built in the 1950s were not built. And that would have been, 3 times 3. So, another 9 to 12 freeway lanes accessing downtown Toronto. The difference in the downtown core is parking lots versus livability. And if you've been downtown Toronto, as all of us have, it's a beautiful, vibrant place, and it's more vibrant today because of the condos that have moved downtown, and the entertainment district and the distillery district, et cetera. If we had those extra 3 freeways and those extra 12 different freeway lanes and all the parking lots that would have had to have parked all of those cars, downtown Toronto would have been a very different place. In the 1960s, the provincial government bought or rented, to start with, the Lakeshore line, and it was a major CN rail freight line, railway line at one point in time. And initially it was just rented, and then it was bought, and then the whole rail line was bought, and the freight traffic was moved up north of Highway 7. That changed downtown Toronto again dramatically and allowed for the expansion of GO both on Lakeshore East and Lakeshore West. And it was profound and changed the fabric of downtown Toronto and allowed the building of the Rogers Centre, everything around the Roundhouse, all those condominiums that are down there, the Scotiabank Arena, formerly the Air Canada Centre, and now. For a long period of time, people thought that the waterfront in downtown Toronto were cut off because of the railway tracks and the Gardiner Expressway. Because of all that development, you don't get that sense anymore. Toronto has reconnected with its waterfront. So transit has been defining for Toronto, but for a generation, we did not invest in transit. And if you look at major cities worldwide, Toronto doesn't compare well with London, Paris, Moscow, New York, Chicago, etc. Even LA today, albeit LA is all above ground LRTs, not subways, but LA in the last 10, 15 years has dramatically increased its transit, such that there's transit lines that go all over the city. The transit line that has the highest benefit to cost ratio is the Milton Mississauga line, because there's only a few trains down in the morning and a few trains down in the evening. And the big study that was done a couple of years ago said that the typical construction of a rail line or a subway line has like a 2 to a 3 benefit to cost ratio. So the benefit and the benefits are in less highway building and quicker traffic to downtown. The typical construction is about 2 to 3 benefit to cost. The Milton Mississauga line was, if built as an all-day 2-way frequent GO train service, an 8 to 1 ratio. And in fact, one projection said that, in the future, if we don't build that transit line along the Milton Mississauga line, we're going to have to probably double deck the Gardiner Expressway, which a lot of people think is absurd, but LA has double decked freeways, New York has double decked freeways, etc. And you go to Taiwan and Shanghai, there's double decked freeways absolutely everywhere. What does it take to get all day two-way frequent GO train service on the Milton Mississauga line. It means negotiating with Canadian Pacific, which is the freight traffic train that owns that land. But the freight traffic, particularly the freight traffic that is of dangerous goods, shouldn't be through urban Toronto. And you think about what happened in Lake Megantic, you think about what happened in Calgary, you think about what happened in so many other places across the world. That same traffic, when spilled, created a catastrophe. And then very quickly, government comes in and funds the construction of alternative routes for that freight traffic. And think about that freight traffic. It goes right through Mavis and Dundas, which is where we had the largest evacuation in Canadian history. So people that say, well, we can't have a disaster in urban Toronto are wrong. We had one in the 1970s with that train derailment right there in the middle of Mississauga. And it continues, and it goes right through the junction. It goes through the annex. It goes right through Leaside, et cetera. It goes right between DuPont and Davenport in downtown Toronto. And it shouldn't. And there have been proposals to move it north to the same area where the CN traffic is, north of Highway 7. And there's in fact a proposal to take it off of going all the way up to Georgetown and take it along Highway 407. When they built Highway 407, they left a right-of-way for freight traffic to go there. That's the right thing to do. And then to use those tracks for GO train service. And if you had all day two-way frequent GO train service on that Milton Mississauga line, and potentially, and I've talked about this for 10 years ago or 10 years now or so, if you added a station at Sherway, if you added a station at Cawthra, maybe added a station at Mavis, maybe added another station in the Streetsville area, it would be like a subway, a surface subway for Mississauga. And frankly, you could add another station or two in Milton if it was going every 15 minutes. And the amount of people that would use that would go up such that, as is the projections have been made, even without those extra stations, there's an 8 to 1 benefit to cost ratio. There's another line that goes up sort of northwest of the city through Bolton to Orangeville that could easily be a GO train service, and that could alleviate some of the 413 highway needs that people have been talking about. You think about how good the Lakeshore Line service is. And there's this concept in transit and transportation called the S-curve. And as supply goes up, in other words, more railway lines and more frequency, demand doesn't meet that supply. But then you reach this fulcrum point where, in fact, demand accelerates far greater than supply. And that's often been described as when you can go to a transit stop and not look at a schedule first, because you know something's coming soon enough. The trains, the subway lines in Toronto come every 5 to 7 minutes. They come so frequently you don't bother looking for a schedule. The GO trains in peak hours, are reasonably frequently, but whether it's a local or an express, and then an off peak, either in some lines every half hour, other lines every hour, and then other lines non-existent. You look at a schedule to make sure you don't miss that train, because if you miss the last train back to Milton, it's a long Uber ride or a long taxi ride. We should be electrifying the GO trains. We should be increasing the service. We should be non-peak time periods, shortening the trains so that it's not as costly to run them. And we should be converting that Milton Mississauga line. We should be converting the Markham line, the Richmond Hill line, the Barrie line. We should be adding 1 or 2 other potential lines to make them like surface subways. And that's what Chicago is doing. That's what Miami is doing. That's what, you think about the city that's got some of the best trains in the world. It's New York, and a lot of it is trains, not subways, with the path in New Jersey and the Long Island Railway in Long Island. Toronto has, and London's built an overground that is using old freight lines that number 1 bisects the city of London, and number 2 circles the city of London. And so we can do it. We have that capacity. What does it take? It takes a few things. Number 1, it takes money. Number 2, it takes an attitude of government has to pay some of the fare on an ongoing basis. And I worry about some of the flippant responses that we've gotten, the simplistic responses that we've gotten. One party is talking about no tolls on the highways. Another party is talking about $1 a day, $1 a fare transit. I think that people should be paying a reasonable, not completely fair, because the reality is both transit and highways cost a lot more than you could ever charge for them. But we should have pricing for highways, maybe not all of them, but for brand new highways that are tolled, 407, 418, 412, 413, if it's ever built. I think tolls make sense. Road pricing makes sense. That's the only way that you give a disincentive to people to drive all the time. And when you think about it, why is it that transit costs money and highways don't? We have an obligation as a society to build both, but for some reason, just because historically we haven't charged for highways and because it's difficult to do so, we don't do it. If you go to California, if you go to Dallas, if you go to London, you go to a lot of major cities in the world, there's toll highways everywhere and they get used. And people factor that decision making into what they're going to do, whether they're going to drive on a more congested road, whether they're going to drive on the less congested road and pay for it, or whether they're going to take transit. And so, you think about London, England. If you ride transit after 10 a.m., the price goes down. So you think about the simplistic dollar fare. I don't think it makes any sense in peak hours, because what we want the peak time period to people that really want to use the transit, and we don't want to overbuild for the peak. We want to build appropriately for the peak. But what would make a lot of sense is to have people wait till 10 or 10:30 and then use the transit. You think about differential pricing. We have differential pricing in airplanes. We have differential pricing in movie theaters. We have differential pricing in hotels. Why can't we have differential pricing for subways and GO trains? And with the Presto card, we can. And we need some flexibility and smartness in that regard. So we need investment in dollars. We need smartness, not simplicity, in thinking through fares and tariffs and taxes and tolls. We also need to build density around transit nodes, because if you can just walk to a subway station or GO train station or whatever, your probability of using the transit goes up dramatically. And you know that if you're downtown and there's a subway stop right there, you use it. And so there has been some NIMBYism, some opposition, some municipal opposition to building transit around transit nodes. And you think about the Port Credit GO train station, the Clarkson GO train station, there probably should be another one at Cawthra or Ogden. There should be density that's allowed around there. And people that worry about density think that density is going to cover the whole city. It doesn't. What it does, it covers just the area right around that area. And think about Yonge Street. Yonge Street is dense right at Yonge Street. Frankly, in between the subway stops, it's not that dense. It's 2 stories. And a block, half a block off of Yonge Street, you're no longer dense. You no longer have that height. And so the density is only within, they call it 400 to 800 meters from a transit node. And so therefore, people shouldn't be worried that the density is going to change their whole city. But it could change and make far more economically justifiable and effective and convenient, particularly for people that can't afford a big single family home, dense condo living, townhouse living right near transit nodes, and that should be built. So I think that what we need is a dramatic expansion of our GO train service and even, frankly, our subway service. We're doing that via LRTs and the Ontario line, but we could do more of it in Toronto. And I've talked about taking the Scarborough subway and extending it to connect up with the Scarborough Town Centre and the subways that go downtown. I've talked about turning it west and continuing it and connecting it up with the University line. In Dallas, they're building a GO train-like train that goes across the Northern Freeway, and the equivalent would be something from the Scarborough Town Centre across the whole northern part of the city to Pearson Airport. And whether that's the subway that would do it, and or whether it's a GO train along that train route and right of way that we have between just south of Highway 7, people can think about. But that makes a lot of sense. And the ridership projections in Dallas are huge. And you think about it, if people could go to the Scarborough Town Centre and park and then jump on a GO train and get to Pearson and not have to drive across the 401 and not have to pay for the parking at Pearson, that might be, for a lot of people, quite attractive. But you can't do that today. You'd have to go down to Union and then back up the UP Express. It doesn't make logical sense. And so therefore, having an east-west transit connection makes a ton of sense. One of the ones that I've talked about as part of a transit alliance is there is a train rail line that goes from the lakeshore line just west of the Christie site, east of Clarkson and the Mississauga border and Sherway, goes up to the Kipling subway stop. And then there's a hydro corridor that goes from the Kipling subway stop right to the airport. and or you could go up the 427. If you've ever been on the SkyTrain, the JFK SkyTrain, it goes from JFK Airport to Jamaica Station, which would be the equivalent of Kipling, because it's the Jamaica Station is that station that is the last station on the subway, the major first station on the commuter rail that goes out to Long Island. And so the equivalent from Jamaica Station would be Kipling. It gets a ton of development. It gets a ton of traffic and transit because it's convenient, because people can jump on the SkyTrain at Pearson Airport, take it down the 427 or this hydro corridor I mentioned to Kipling, decide to go on the GO train that's now all day two-way frequent west through Mississauga and Milton, or east to downtown Toronto, or in my desire, go down to the Lakeshore line and take it Lakeshore east or west. It makes a ton of sense to build. We've got these old freight lines bisecting Toronto in a whole myriad of places. We have been using them. We should be using them more. They could change our city for the better with effectively surface subways. And because of that, we may not have to build a lot more freeways, if frankly, maybe not any more freeways. And I think that people's ridership went down dramatically during COVID-19. The world's coming back. I've been on so many subways, GO trains, planes in the last month or so. It's almost as if COVID never happened. We're still wearing masks on planes. I think that we may be more cognizant of ventilation, of not going out to work or into society if we've got a bad cold or we're sneezing or we're coughing, all those good things. Because you know what, the secret, and I've been told this by several people, the bad secret of long-term care is more people die every year of the flu because or pneumonia, and they get it. And historically, there haven't been a lot of protections against that. One of the benefits of COVID, if there could be any benefits of COVID, is the sanitary conditions, the protection that people in long-term care have been making sure they use, has meant that flu hasn't come into a lot of long-term care homes. And so some of the things that we did in COVID, like not coughing into your hand or sneezing in your hand and then shaking someone's hand, makes sense, and we should practice that long term. But what I think that's going to do is we're already back at 80% of the pre-COVID transits volumes. I think it's going to mean that we're going to go back to using transit, and we're going to go back using downtown offices, and we're going to go back shopping downtown, and the hockey arenas and the basketball arenas and the concerts are all going to be full. And so therefore, yes, while transit usage went down dramatically in the last 2 years, I think it's going to come back, and I think it could accelerate, particularly if it's all day, two-way, frequent, electrified, convenient, safe, and reasonably priced. And that's what I think we should be doing, and that's what I want to argue for. Thanks for joining me on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Good night, everybody.